Welcome to the first episode of So I Finally Played, which is a series where I go back and play the games that I never got round to playing on release. I was actually planning on picking up the first season of last year's Hitman, but then I discovered Far Cry Primal was on my Steam list. I must have bought it during the sale and forgot all about it, so Hitman will have to wait just a little bit longer. If you've played any of the Far Cry's since number 3, then you know pretty much what you're getting into here. It's a big open world with outposts to clear out that unlock fast travel points, beacons to activate that expose more of the map.
Yeah, not that though.
So yeah, one thing I didn't think about when I decided to play all of the Far Cry games in order and keep a running ranking list is that I already made a video about Far Cry Primal. It came out 7 years ago and it's only 10 minutes long, and I kinda hate that video because I sound like I've just come off a shift at the Black Country Museum, and the editing is even worse than the shambles I managed to put together these days. Plus that video was done in isolation rather than looking at the game as part of the larger series, so that's enough for me to justify doing a remake. And hey, a huge part of the games industry is remaking existing stuff, so I guess that makes this video meta, right? Is that how that works? Far Cry Primal is an interesting beast. If you ignore the Xbox exclusive games, which is easy to do because seriously who cares about those, this is the first game in the series since the original to not include a number in the title. I feel like this is worth mentioning because I myself tend to think of this as being to Far Cry 4 what Blood Dragon was to Far Cry 3, a smaller expansion pack type experience using the main game as a foundation. However, at the time, with a 2-year gap since the release of Far Cry 4 and Assassin's Creed Unity, I think anyone would have been forgiven for thinking that Ubisoft were doing away with numbered entries into their various series, and Primal would mark the first of the new subtitle-only games. In actuality, what we got was neither of those things. This is far too big for a simple expansion pack, yet not quite big enough to be a full-blown sequel, as confirmed by the eventual existence of Far Cry 5. I honestly can't remember how much Primal cost to buy on release. In fact, I can't even remember buying this game at all, and apparently I didn't even play it until about a year after its launch. But to this day, outside of sales, it's priced only just a little bit less than Far Cry 6 on Steam. All discussions about the price of a game being relative to its length aside, this would set expectations to be considerably higher than something like a £20 expansion pack. After playing through the Shangri-La missions in Far Cry 4, which were developed by Ubisoft Toronto for that game, I'd assumed that those guys approached the higher-ups with the plans for an entire game based on the gun-free and animal companion mechanics of those sections. There is a precedent for that within Ubisoft, seeing how the sailing side missions in Assassin's Creed 3 were later expanded and given their own entire game. Then again, as far as I know, that is just an assumption. I've never been able to find any confirmation as to whether the boat stuff from AC3 was expanded into Black Flag, or if work on Black Flag was already done enough that the team making AC3 could pinch some of the boat stuff for their game. Similarly with Primal though, I could find no mention of the Shangri-La missions when discussing the development of this game, and in fact it seems to be a completely new team at Ubisoft Montreal that worked on this, with the creative director Jean-Christophe Guyot having previously directed every Prince of Persia game between Warrior Within and the 2008 one. This unfortunately continues the trend of an annoying lack of behind the scenes details being easily available online, and it's not just with this series but with games in general. If you do look for documentaries about Far Cry Primal, pretty much all of it is going to be about how they got historians in to create a new, partially accurate language for this game. Well, technically 3 languages because there are 3 major tribes, so there would be some differences between them, even if they are all very similar. Kind of like Hindi, Urdu and Punjabi, at least that's what my wife tells me, and she can speak them, so I'll take her word for it, whatever language that word happens to be in. While creating a new language based on limited historical sources is certainly an achievement, I do have to ask what it really adds to the game. Even if, by some amazing chance, they managed to accurately recreate a language spoken by tribes over 12,000 years ago, we would never know. No one alive today speaks it, and it took a team of historians to put it all together in the first place. The characters could all be speaking Simlish, and it would have the same effect. I was going to say Klingon there, but I know there are people who can fluently speak that and would be able to play the game without subtitles if that were the case. I guess in my mind, this sort of detail could be comparable to the horse testicle physics in Red Dead Redemption 2. Yes, it's very impressive and clear, but does it add anything to the game? Was it worth the extra effort? Does the creation of a new language enhance my experience of throwing spears through Neanderthal chests or dropping beehives from my drone owl? But I'm sure plenty of people would say that yes, it was worth it because of the immersion it provides. And to be honest, I don't really think it's worth comparing to the horse bollock physics because at least you notice the language all the characters speaking. I'm just a bit salty because I'm interested in how games are made, and all anyone talks about with this game is the language they created for it. I do remember the reveal trailer for this game though, showing the opening cutscene where a group of hunters stalk a herd of mammoth and getting pretty excited for it. While I don't possess the knowledge to remember every Ubisoft game developed in the past 10 years or so, Primal certainly feels like the last time Ubisoft really took a risk on something different, even if they did keep the Far Cry name on the box to play it a little bit safe. The game was received pretty well when it released, but clearly not well enough to make me go out and buy it straight away, and it has some fervent fans out there singing its praises at every opportunity to this day, particularly about the survival mode that I believe was introduced as part of a post-launch update. I also, conversely, see people commonly dismiss this game completely, claiming it's just a reskin of Far Cry 4 with the guns taken away. This feels like one of those times where a popular YouTuber made this claim and people who watch that just parrot this point. Yes, I've seen the map comparisons between Primal and Far Cry 4, but I'd wager that no one would have noticed this if someone didn't compare the maps side by side. Certainly, the bodies of water are basically the same, but did anyone actually play this game and at any point think, wait a minute, this is Kyrat, this is where I got murked by that honey badger after I crossed my gyrocopter? No, you didn't, because this game looks completely different to Far Cry 4 with entire new biomes and landscapes. I mean, I certainly never came across anything looking like this in Kyrat. So with there being next to no development stories to dwell on, it's interesting to me at least to note that the same development studios worked on this as Far Cry 4. Except for Red Storm Entertainment, who worked on the multiplayer mode for that last game. They weren't invited back because Far Cry Primal is a strictly single player experience, no multiplayer and no co-op. The main development studio was Ubisoft Montreal as usual, but once again they were supported by Ubisoft Toronto, Shanghai and Kyiv. Though unlike previous titles, I couldn't find any information as to what elements of the game each studio worked on. So we'll just get stuck into the story, I guess. Please consider this your spoiler warning, but the story is very bare bones with no twists or turns or political intrigue or anything like that, but if you really don't want to know what happens, then here is your warning. Bugger off and go play the game before coming back here and calling me names in the comments. As the game opens, we are told the story of the Wenger tribe, who for some reason decided to travel far. Some of the Wenger found a land called Oros, which they quite liked despite being in competition with a flesh-eating tribe called the Udam and the Izila tribe who have mastered fire. Somehow, in an age before satellite communication or carrier pigeons, other Wenger hear about Oros and set out to find it for themselves. We join player character Takkar in the scene that was released to announce the game to the public, hunting mammoth with his posse. Apparently they haven't eaten in a few days, so this needs to go well. Which did make me wonder whether they are aware that they are omnivores and they could have eaten some berries, or maybe gone after some rabbits or something before they resorted to tracking a herd of giant woolly boys. Eventually Shere Khan's ancestor turns up and kills all of Takkar's buddies, leaving him limping away from the overly agitated saber-toothed tiger that apparently isn't quite satisfied with the small mammoth and human meal deal he just acquired for himself. No, he definitely needs Takkar's flesh to make it a properly balanced meal. Straight away after being given control, we are introduced to the crafting and hunting mechanics of Primal. Crafting has been a staple of Far Cry since number 3, but it's never been as immediately essential as it is in Primal, though this still has various coloured plants to pick and animal skins to harvest like the other games. On top of the usual hunting and crafting, there's also other materials in the world to collect, like bits of wood and rock. These are a continuous necessity throughout the game as we need this stuff to craft our weapons, several of which can be used to twat people in melee combat but can also be thrown to twat people from a distance. We also get hunter vision for this game, which makes everything grey except for living creatures and their blood and or scent. If you wound an animal and it sprints off into the nearest thicket, you can track its blood trail. Similarly, predators will leave a haze of stink, letting you track them before they get the jump on you. Though, for me, most of the time that didn't happen and I just get jumped by a jaguar while I'm enjoying a nice walk in the woods. Personally, I think this sets a strong message right from the off. This is fundamentally different from other Far Cry games. This is more like a survival crafting game stretched to fit over the Far Cry formula. You'll need to be keeping an eye on your crafting materials, as you will likely need to craft new weapons and ammo during combat encounters. I do like the improvements they've made to the crafting mechanics over previous games, but I'll probably get into those later. For now, Takkar gathers his strength and gets himself armed before trying to find his way out of the sectioned off tutorial area, and he ends up bumping into another Wenger, which is damn lucky, called Sailor. I had to look up her name just now, like I will do with almost all of the other character names, because names get lost in the made up language for me. This is very much a me problem because I'm shit at learning other languages, to the point where I can barely hear words I know when they're being used in sentences. But Far Cry 3 and 4 were very good at establishing memorable characters, but here I only remember them by description, like main lady here, shaman chap, hunter woman, redneck twat, you get the picture. Sailor is one of the Wenger that has already found Oros, which is luckily just the other side of this cave that you happen to find. Apparently, a chap called Ul from the Udam tribe destroyed the Wenger home in Oros, and the survivors have all been scattered across the area. Sailor recognises Takkar as the protagonist of this video game, and so tasks you with building a new Wenger home and finding the scattered survivors. After getting to know the local area and practicing a bit of combat, we soon find Tensei, the Wenger shaman who I never would have guessed is voiced by T.C. Carlson, who also voiced the original Kratos. To be fair, Tensei isn't the angry, shouty type, so it's no wonder I didn't recognise him. Tensei continues the now traditional Far Cry trope of providing drug-induced visions, though whereas Jason or RJ would either inhale or inject medicinal herbs, Takkar instead drinks a lot of blood and dirt and other nondescript items out of some sort of skull. This first vision has Takkar chasing an owl through the air until he catches it, which grants him the ability to tame the creatures of Oros, or at least this one particular owl, I guess. Tenzin bestows upon you the title of Beastmaster and sends you out into the world to try and tame a wolf, which seems like a bit of a step up, but I guess the Wenger haven't created the vocabulary to allow Takkar to give a facetious response just yet, so he just agrees and wanders out into the night to find a fucking wolf and try and become best friends with it. This mission unlocks a few new mechanics for anyone playing through the series for the first time. I think the animal taming thing returns in Far Cry 5 to some extent, or at least having a catalogue of assistants to summon at any point, but the other things are unique to Primal, as far as I'm aware. We'll start with the animal taming, where you can tame the various predators of Oros to be your best friend. You do this by crafting and throwing out some bait, which will attract any nearby carnivores, and you then approach them and hold your hand out for a few seconds while making shush noises, after which it becomes your loyal companion which will fight to the death to protect you. I like the idea behind this system, but I kinda wish they went a little bit further with it, which I think Far Cry 5 might just do, but I guess I'll find out when I get to it. I may be completely misremembering. There are a whole lot of creatures to tame, with both common and rare variants of various species, and a few legendary types which you can only gain access to through a late game quest. Each creature has a score in terms of strength, speed and stealth, and once you've tamed one you can summon them at any point. If they die, you have to spend some red plants to revive them, and you can top up their health with a bit of meat. Each creature will also have a different perk, so for example a bear will draw the attention of enemies, while something else, I can't quite remember which, will dig up hidden crafting materials for you if you stand idle for a little bit. I didn't play around with the different animals too much, and I didn't unlock all of them, but I did find it helpful to keep a rare jaguar around when you're trying to sneak into places, as the bears are generally quite grumpy and will storm ahead of you to devour the souls of all who stand before them. I guess my issue with this system, well, not issue because it's not that much of a negative, so I guess something I feel they could improve about this system is the stats for the various creatures. Once I've tamed a creature with higher stats, I have next to no reason to experiment with anything that is objectively less effective. Sure, you have those different perks, but I was near the end of my playthrough before I even noticed those. The other new mechanic is the owl, which is used for scouting. Binoculars in a game set in 12,000 BC would be unrealistic, so instead we can see through the eyes of our owl friend as she glides gently overhead, tagging enemies to allow you to see them through walls and such, as in the previous games. Later on, she can be trained to attack enemies directly or to drop bombs on them from the air, and I'm happy to be corrected here because I haven't played every game ever, but this seems like the logical inspiration for the drone from Ghost Recon Wildlands, which serves the exact purpose but it can hover and move backwards. This works as a great replacement for the binoculars and allows you to get a better picture of the area ahead, helping you to plan approaches and pathways through areas. It did take me a while though to realise that when summoned, it always moves forward from directly above you. Once I figured that out, I could get my bearings much more easily to help put my plans into action. Finally, we have the nighttime, which I think they did a fantastic job with here. When your first sun sets in Oros, a screen will pop up telling you that nighttime is pretty dangerous, and is going to show you why humans evolved to generally be daywalkers rather than night crawlers. All of the Far Cry games up to this point that actually have a day-night cycle have very few differences between daytime and nighttime. Usually we're told that enemies have more limited visibility at night, but then so do we as the players. I've long had a bit of a bugbear with day-night cycles in games, as nighttime usually just makes everything a shade of deep blue, but otherwise you can still see perfectly fine. I did download some realistic lighting mods for Skyrim VR, which I really enjoyed, but Primal is one of the few games that I've played that makes the nighttime more than just a filter over the world. There are more predators knocking around, and they are more aggressive. Certain animals will only come out at night, though confusingly badgers don't despite them being nocturnal. I don't know. Apparently certain plants can only be found at night, but I never noticed this detail, and fire becomes important as it can help illuminate your way and can be used to scare off certain creatures. My favourite detail with nighttime though is that the eyes of creatures will glow in the darkness. It's a little detail, but I think it adds a whole lot of atmosphere to the situation. Big animals with sharp teeth just watching you as you skulk around in the dark. And I'm going to take this opportunity here just to gush about how good this game looks, because Jesus titty fucking Christ, this game looks fantastic. This is the only game in the series I've played so far where I've occasionally stopped just to appreciate what I'm looking at. And I don't remember paying for the HD texture pack, so I think this is with the base textures as well. Maybe it's just the use of fog and god rays, but I really did enjoy just looking at Oros. During the day, it feels like a warm, inviting place to take a stroll in. I mean, if you could remove all the bloodthirsty predators, obviously. At night, the landscape is lit up with the glow of campfires in the distance and hunting parties giving away their location with torchlight. It also makes a flaming bear running around in a panic a much more impactful sight as it ignites the dry grassland beneath its burning feet, lighting up the darkness and sending other creatures all but stampeding away from the flames. I would try to make some sort of comparison between the fire effects here with the rest of the series, but I think it's fairly clear that Ubisoft really haven't been too bothered about that feature since Far Cry 2, and they just include some basic effects and call it a day. I'll bring it up in a future video if it ever seems worth it, but like the last few games, fire just spreads a little bit and then dies out. It just doesn't feel as unpredictable and dangerous as it did in Far Cry 2. Well, when it's being spread around by a rampaging bear, it does make it a little bit more exciting, I guess. For as good as this world looks at all times of day, after a few hours I noticed that there is no rain in this very lush Central European land. Have you ever been to Central Europe? It rains there, quite a bit. It seems like an odd omission, but as I write this, I'm now thinking back to other games in the series, and the only Far Cry game with rain is Far Cry 2? That doesn't sound like it should be right, but I can't remember any rain in any of the other games. We get a little bit of snow in parts of 4 and some areas in Primal, but where's the rain? Am I just remembering wrong? Have I forgotten something? It seems like sneaking through a hedge in the dead of night would be massively elevated with a heavy rainstorm and the occasional flash of lightning lighting up the area and the roar of thunder sending animals running. Hell, the lightning could even start some fires, providing distractions or blocking off routes you were planning to take. This seems like such an obvious thing to leave out, and I'm surprised it took me this long to realise it was missing. Next you're going to tell me there are no hang gliders in this game. Oh right, yeah. Those crafting materials I mentioned earlier are used for more than just crafting new weapons and the ammo for them. By acquiring some tribe members, we need to house them, so we need to gather various amounts of sticks, stones and skins to build them a little hut all of their own. All huts that you build are assigned to a specific character, and once constructed, each can be upgraded once. For many huts, this second upgrade will only net you some bonus XP, so I didn't have much enthusiasm to try that, but other huts will give you access to some new skills and weapons or equipment. Once you start building a few tents, the Udam will come and stick their foreheads where they don't belong, and their leader Ul will get right up in your reasonably sized heads and threaten your very existence before putting you down and walking away slowly. The Udam are still a threat to your people, and they need to be removed if you are to live peacefully in this land. To do that, we're going to need to recruit more Lost Wenger and build them some huts, and this task makes up the majority of the rest of the game. You find your lost people and complete a quest to recruit them to unlock new parts of the skill tree. I'll get more into my thoughts on the skill tree later on, but I do feel that the system here is possibly my least favourite in the series so far. With our primary goal now being to wipe out the people who were likely here long before we were, we set about recruiting ourselves a master hunter, a crafter with only one arm, and a warrior with only one eye, which seems like a disadvantage when you need to judge the distance between your club and your enemy's bonds. Udam irked me a little bit, as they almost feel like they were designed by committee to be as easily identifiable as the baddies as possible. So they are cannibals that tend to be covered in blood and wear the remains of their fallen foes. Most of them have visible and very severe scarring, and they're Neanderthals, so they look different from you and are therefore bad. They just love killing, and so they're going to kill you. Never mind the fact that you have sauntered into their lands and started taking resources, but then this is set in Europe, so I guess this is where that sort of behaviour comes from. The Udam are also able to utilise toxic clouds, which they can somehow localise and maintain to block passages and halt your progress through the story. While you're out about exploring the world and completing quests for various people, you'll eventually start heading south a little bit, likely looking for some of that southern rock dust that you need to upgrade your spear. By doing so, you'll soon start coming across angry people wearing a lot of blue. These are the the Azila, the Fire Master tribe mentioned in the opening cutscene but not heard about since. We eventually learn that these guys are capturing and sacrificing our people, which just adds to the question of why Oros is so desired by the Wenger, considering it's currently occupied by angry cannibals and people keen on burning bitches. Udam stick to the more northern part of the map in the mountains, with the Azila keeping to the warmer south, and each group's hunting parties essentially patrol their respective areas. You can significantly lessen these patrols by capturing the outposts, which functionally remain the same from the last few games. With this being 12,000 BC, there are no radio towers, but instead we have bonfires, which are basically tiny little outposts that maybe have about 3 or 4 people guarding them. Both bonfires and outposts provide fast travel and respawn points, and there are also campfires to be found dotted around the map, which can also be used to respawn from after death. Each of these locations, actually I'm not sure about the campfires, but the outposts and bonfires will have resource pouches, which will be topped up each day with a stack of various resources, the amount and variety of which can be increased by completing various quests, which brings us on to what I feel is possibly the best improvement they made to this series, and possibly the entire survival crafting genre. Resource-specific inventory stacks. I'm sure someone will jump to the comments to tell me that Far Cry Primal was not the first game to introduce this, but this is the first time I remember coming across this system. Every collectible in the game, be it the various different types of dust, sticks, and the wide variety of animal pelts, has its own inventory slot and limit. I've bitched in previous videos about how a single leaf in Far Cry 3 will take up just as much inventory space as the entire skin of a tiger, or how you could fill up your bag with random bits of tat that enemy soldiers carry around with them. Far Cry Primal does away with this entirely, and frankly eliminates one of my biggest barriers to fully enjoying survival crafting mechanics. Now you can just collect everything. Anything and everything. Walking past a pile of clay, pick it up, it's all good, enjoy yourself. Once that stack is full, you won't be able to collect anymore, but it doesn't matter because there's literally no downside to having a full stack. It isn't sat there taking up space at the expense of something more immediately useful. It's waiting in its own little pocket of space until you eventually need to upgrade your club or build a bigger tent or whatever it might be. I know people will claim it's not realistic or whatever, but maybe put this type of inventory management in all these types of games as an option that you can turn on or off. It eliminates the annoyance of inventory management and lets us focus on upgrading our bows to shoot dickheads more effectively. And because you can stockpile rarer resources, it means you can end up with a fairly steady pace of upgrade options for your equipment. It's simple, effective, it's beautiful, and I love it. More of this sort of thing, please. One side effect of these gathering resources is the effect it has on the healing system. During my playthrough of the series, I've realised how I am noticing the famous healing animations less and less between the games, to the point where I didn't even bring them up in my Far Cry 4 video because I barely saw them, and when I did, they were usually just the boring ones. In Far Cry Primal, I think I maybe saw one of these animations on 2 separate occasions, so I'll be surprised if I'm showing any of my footage on screen now because I've got about 15 hours of video to sift through to try and find it. But the reason I barely saw these animations, which in Primal will only play if you have no healing items, is because Far Cry Primal keeps you flush with healing packs. This game encourages you to hunt animals regularly as they drop, for instance, animal fats which are required for crafting replacement weapons. Along with animal fats, you'll also collect their pelts and a few bits of meat, the latter of which is your core healing item. A raw piece of meat, even raw pork apparently, will heal you for 2 slots out of a maximum health bar of 6 slots. You can still collect green leaves to wrap around the meat, like some sort of proto-burrito, which will heal you for more slots, and there's a couple of other upgrades to the healing items. Meat is also used to heal up your animal companion when they get injured, and it's a key ingredient in the bait bags you need to lure creatures in if you want to tame them. Weirdly though, they seem to remove the ability to throw meat to attract animals in to attack surrounding enemies, a mechanic which feels to me like it was perfect for just this sort of game. All of this means that having a decent supply of meat is fairly essential to your playthrough, and you are given so many opportunities to stock up that I hardly ever found myself without any, meaning I always had healing options to hand, which in turn means that the famous healing animations barely get a look in. In a more practical sense, this also removes some of the tension from combat, as healing is fairly quick and easy. I'm not sure what appropriately themed alternative they could have come up with for healing items, but having something so common has almost removed one of the things the series is known for. The rest of the narrative sees you recruiting more people from your village until you are ready to take on the leaders of the enemy tribes and remove their threat from this land once and for all. Along the way, you get the obligatory mission where you lose all your gear, except in this one you get it all back after killing one person who had his back to you just outside your cell. Your cell which also has no roof and a grappling hook lying around for you. We also get a couple of drug vision missions which appear to show you some sort of Armageddon prophecy for the 2 enemy tribes. The Udam vision gives you a mace made of ice and has you following a sculpture of a large woman as it plows through ice caves, bashing Udam warriors out of the way as you go. The Azila vision is much more of a visual spectacle, with you wearing a sacred mask of some sort as you slowly destroy the moon during an eclipse. Unless I missed something, the Udam vision has no bearing on how you eventually kill Ul. There are ice shards hanging from the ceiling of his boss arena that you can shoot to drop on him, and part of the boss arena is the giant lady sculpture, but other than that I didn't see any similarities to the vision. The Azila boss, however, sees you don the same mask from that vision, which sees Azila running in fear from you before having a final showdown with their leader during an eclipse. On the whole, I personally think that the mix of survival crafting and traditional Far Cry gameplay work together really well, and it feels like a real attempt to do something new with the existing formula. We've spent at least 5 games crouching in hedges and stalking our targets. Now let's do that again, but almost every other animal out there is doing the same thing to us. We are now the hunter and the hunted, and having the sharpest stick won't necessarily mean that you'll win the fight. With that, we should talk about the combat for a bit. We'll roll the montage. Ugh, that really doesn't have the same effect without gunfire and explosions, does it? A common criticism of this game is the melee combat, and I do have to agree that particularly in the latter stages of the game, it does lose its appeal. Now don't get me wrong, an upgraded two-handed club will send weaker enemies ragdolling off screen in an incredibly satisfying way, but the more armoured chaps take several whacks and can feel like you're hitting them with a squeaky inflatable hammer. This can be countered by using pointed sticks on their exposed flesh, like in the legs where I managed to stunlock a few people, but like with Skyrim, the melee combat just didn't feel as impactful or powerful to me as guns do. Weird that. Happily, the range combat did feel like it had a bit more of an oomph. Throwing a spear at a dude and watching them fly away with it protruding from their chests is a wonderful sight that frankly never got old. Throwing clubs didn't feel quite as good, but it does leave enemies open to a few quick stabs, and the bow and arrows did feel satisfying to use, though I did notice quite a bit of arrow tracking going on. Maybe survival mode or higher difficulty settings turn off arrow tracking, I'm not sure, but that is all there is to say about weaponry. 3 melee weapons that can be thrown and a couple of bows, giving the game the lowest variety of weaponry in the series. The almost series staple of throwing rocks returns, but later on you can unlock a sling, which can interrupt enemy actions when you wang a rock at their face. Later in the game you also unlock B-bombs to throw at people, and eventually fire bombs and berserk weapons, making a series first and another mechanic brought in from another Ubisoft series. Berserk weapons have been in the Assassin's Creed series since, I think, Assassin's Creed 2, and in Primal we get them in the form of bombs and shards. These weapons will send enemies loopy and attacking anyone around them, helping to create distractions and potentially thin out enemy numbers before you launch your own attack. While I will always enjoy sending a big heavy unit berserk and letting them wipe out pretty much everyone else for me, I do wish these and the firebombs were made available earlier in the game. To unlock them, you have to essentially recruit 2 enemy high-ranking types, which come at the end of tough outpost encounters. I'm sure I'll get some get good comments about how people have unlocked these things early in the game because they're awesome and whatever, but I would have appreciated having a wider variety of projectile weaponry for a longer portion of the game, rather than just the back third of the game that I had to play around with them. Going back to the animal taming for a bit, as much as that mechanic makes sense narratively, seeing as Takkar is generally known as Beastmaster, as well as Mammoth Feet and Pissface, this does seem to have come at the expense of calling in support like we did in Far Cry 4. It's not clear if the Wenger in Oros have a tribal leader. I mean, I think Takkar is supposed to be the leader, but he only got started on this whole thing by following Sailor's instructions, and Tensei seems to have no issue throwing orders your way. Either way, it's clearly Takkar putting in all the legwork and building the entire village while also killing all who threaten their way of life. I don't think it's too unreasonable that he would be able to call on some help from his fellow hunters every now and again, does it? Like in Far Cry 4, we still get little incidents happening around you as you explore Oros, like captured Wenger being attacked and stuff like that, and rescuing these people adds population to your village. Certain levels of population are required to access some village upgrades, and at certain milestones your population will result in you receiving more bags of resources each day, until eventually they just give you more XP when rescuing other Wenger. So once you've got enough people to let you unlock all your upgrades, you are then rescuing people to give you a slight XP boost when rescuing more people. Remember Assassin's Creed Freedom Cry? It was an expansion for Black Flag until it got its own standalone release. My main issue with that game is that it had several really good ideas but not enough game to flesh them out properly. One of those really good ideas, in my opinion, was a mechanic where you could free slaves from around the map who would then join your rebellion. At certain milestones of members you would unlock new weapons and abilities, and I wonder if that sort of approach might have been a better fit for this game rather than the traditional skill tree that we ended up with. The skill tree in Primal is split amongst various teachers, for lack of a better word. You go out into the world and find lost Wenger to bring back to your village. One master crafter, another hunter, and so on and so on. Each of these characters has their own skill tree, though several of the skills will be locked off until you either pass a certain point in the story or you upgrade their tent. A couple of these characters are those enemy chiefs I mentioned earlier that are required to unlock different projectiles, and they need their own tents upgraded to unlock access to all of their skills too. With the narrative focus being on building up your population, I'm left wondering if a more stripped back skill tree tied to your population increase would have been a better fit for this game. Before I go any further, I'll say that in the early game, I thought the skill tree was pretty well handled because you never had full access to the skills from the start. Available skills were rolled out gradually as you progressed through the story, so there was never an overwhelming choice of skills at any one point. That soon disappears though, and once you've got everyone back at your village, there seems to be more skills available than there was in Far Cry 3, which is a much longer experience than this game. And now that we've mentioned Assassin's Creed, I do tend to compare any settlement building mechanics like this to Ezio's villa in Assassin's Creed 2. For anyone not familiar, in that game you get given a rundown villa and the surrounding town near the start of the game, and you can spend money to upgrade it as you play through the rest. You can improve the shops, build a brothel, and repair structures to gain access to them. This was a long-term project that gave you in-game benefits, like unlocking new areas to explore and providing a cheaper supply of weapons and armor. I feel like the village in Far Cry Primal is relatively useless in a mechanical sense as it is. Sure, you build and then upgrade some tents to allow you to access new skills, but that's it. What if you could upgrade your hunter's tents to recruit more hunters, who then bring back more pelts to leave in your resource bag? There could be a tent to build and upgrade which allows you to call in reinforcements should you need them, or give crafters more resources to come up with new ways of caving in enemy skulls. It feels like they started off with the idea of growing a village, but maybe didn't have the time to do anything interesting with it, leaving what's left to feel like an interactive menu that we have to awkwardly navigate occasionally to unlock new skill trees. I do just want to come back to the world design that I touched on earlier, mainly about people dismissing this game as being a reskin of Far Cry 4 just because the map is the same. The 2D map certainly is very similar, but this is not Kyrat in the slightest. From a practical sense, you couldn't just do a palette swap either, because Far Cry 4 was designed with cars and gliders in mind. In Uros, you are a caveman, with only his 2 big feet to get him around, at least in the early game. The grappling hook makes a very welcome return, and the game gives you many more opportunities to actually use it, directly addressing my point in the Far Cry 4 video about not having much opportunity to use it, specifically in outposts. While many outposts are just villages in an open field, several of them are now set against rock faces and in cliffs, providing you with the option to grapple up to the high ground to scout around, or lower yourself down for some stabbing. Compared to Kyrat, Uros also feels like it has a greater sense of verticality, with a few memorable outposts taking place beneath vast rock overhangs and within cave systems and crags in the earth, with many outposts offering a variety of ways to move through the environment, systematically eliminating the opposition, something which is made easier with your aerial attack owl scouting the way for you. There are a couple of snags with this new outpost design though, specifically the 2 instances where you have to recruit a member of each enemy tribe. To be fair, my attempt to recruit the Udam chap was a bit of a clusterfuck as I scrambled around for cover, clubbing people to death and gorging on raw meat just to stay alive, but my approach to the Zila chap was a much more calculated encounter. Instead of working my way through the outpost, I skirted around the outside, Spider-Manning my way across the cliffs and right up to my target. I distracted him and his 2 mates with bees, killed his chums, and then set about stabbing his knees until he died. Thing is, this commotion will alert the rest of the tribe down the hill, and because he has a boss health bar, I am 99% certain he cannot be one-shot with a stealth kill. At least I couldn't find any videos of people doing it, so I'm assuming it can't be done. Now, my positioning did allow me to create a bottleneck of dickheads running up the hill that I could satisfyingly dispatch with more B-bombs and traps, but I do wonder what the point is of allowing us a stealth route that bypasses the entire outpost if we then have to clear out the whole place anyway in order to proceed. On a quick side note, I noticed that Primal has buttons for quick saving and quick loading, something I only learned while preparing for this specific attack. I thought I'd give it a go once I was in position to attack my target, and then learned that the so-called quick load just takes you back to the nearest autosave point, which is at the beginning of my approach to the outpost. Dear developers, this is not a quick save feature. This is just a load last checkpoint button. Don't call it a quick save. Actually no, call it a quick save, but just make it a fucking quick save. I'd like to experiment and dick around in this open world game. Don't make me have to replay the last several minutes every time I want to try something new and experiment with the mechanics you've provided me. That was actually quite a long side note. replaying sections can be a bit of a slog in the early game because of your limited ability to move quickly. You do eventually unlock the ability to ride certain animals like bears and saber-toothed tigers, though I did find that doing so directly affected how many resources I was collecting. You can still collect twigs and rocks while riding around, but maybe it's something psychological about riding a fast creature and stopping every 5 seconds to collect stuff made me just ignore them and get to where I'm going. Now I say it out loud, this does once again sound very much like another me problem, but I do wonder if anyone else found that they were naturally picking up less stuff once you could get around the map more quickly. There are some larger outposts that your animals can't access, which I guess would be better described as dungeons, and these can be vast areas filled with many enemies, and some story missions even chain several of these together and stick a boss fight at the end. After getting caught with my loincloth around my ankles at one point, I decided to take a chance and just sprint past the small army I had just agitated, and to my surprise discovered that there is obviously some sort of trigger point for them to stop following you. They just gave up the chase because I'd gone far enough. This does make replaying lengthy areas easier, I guess, but it was a little bit immersion breaking. Then again, the 2 boss encounters had enough other enemies knocking around anyway without adding any more in from the outside. These boss encounters are with powerful enemies with their own health bars, which I think are unique in the series, other than the very first game, which had bosses but I don't think they had health bars. They each have their own arena, and the Udam boss has ice that you can drop on him to stun him, and the Azila lady has cover that you can destroy to leave her exposed. While I did like that aspect of both of the bosses, what I did not enjoy was the, in my opinion, lazy decision to have them periodically call in a wave of reinforcements to attack you. I've always hated this tactic in games as it feels like a cheap way to increase the difficulty. They couldn't figure out how to make it more challenging, so fuck it, more dudes. My final thought on the world and interacting with it is, annoyingly, the UI. Now, helpfully, there are a ton of options in the settings menu to customize the UI. Pretty much every part of it can be toggled on or off, but I found that many of them needed some sort of middle ground. An example of a frankly wild decision was to have the icons for character quests displayed on the screen in front of you, so you follow the icon to get to your objective. The thing is, that looks fucking awful, so you can turn it off. You can tag it on your map and follow your minimap icon like in the older GTA games, and that's just dandy, problem solved. But the same icons show on screen for your animal companion, along with their health bar and whatever action they're currently doing, which is usually clawing pricks, both literally and figuratively. I turned the animal display off to reduce the fairly consistent screen clutter, but in doing so lost the ability to see the health bar of my pet, so I just have to pop over to them occasionally and feed them some meat just in case they've been a bit injured. The amount of UI customization in this game is frankly phenomenal, something we are seeing much more frequently now, and I for one am all for it. And the fact that these options are here in an 8-year-old game was quite surprising to me, but without sounding like a spoiled brat, they really could have done more. Off the top of my head, I'm thinking of the Horizon Zero Dawn setting where the UI turns off until you need it in combat or something like that. And with a game this good looking, I really would have loved that sort of option. Which I think is mostly everything I have an opinion on about Far Cry Primal. This is an excellent game for what it is, and what it is, looking back, is almost like the last hurrah for trying new ideas over at Ubisoft. They took 2 established game systems and mushed them together in a unique setting, and ended up with a game that some people get incredibly defensive about to this day. People like you, yes, you, who have already commented telling me how I'm a twat for not playing the survivor mode because that's the only true mode. I'm glad that's there for people that want it, but that sort of thing is not for me. I don't have the patience, not in a bigger game like this. I played Primal for about 13 hours and apparently only completed 40% of the game, and that's after having done almost all of the character quests. There is plenty of game here, and for anyone still craving some caveman adventures, I still had another 60% of this game to get through, which will certainly be good news for any completionists out there. I didn't complete all of the legendary hunts though, and I might just go back and do the last of those after I finish making this video. These things are like multi-stage hunts where you can craft predetermined traps in the unique closed-off environments, tracking your prey again and again until you finally bring it down and then tame it. Kind of like a elite Pokemon battle, now that I think about it. I did do the one with a huge bear, and when you lose sight of it in the cave, just hearing roars in the distance and a parliament of bats screeching past you was the closest feeling to a horror game I think I've ever come across in the series. The story in the game is nothing to write home about. I mean, it's a caveman story, so there's not going to be much political intrigue in there. I think there is a case to be made about how the Wenger are actually the baddies, despite the fact that we just fight cannibals. Again, we rock up into this new land and start fighting the locals until they're all dead. The way the Azila leader is killed is also pretty horrific, and Adam Jensen, Takkar, kills his Udam ally pretty offhandedly, like he barely needs any convincing before he kills him. But we did take in some children, so we must be the goodies. Turns out that Ul of the Udam had a couple of kids, who he asks Takkar to look after. The final scene of the game after the credits shows the daughter to be seemingly taming a huge bear, a skill which has been unique to Takkar up to this point. Did they have plans for a sequel at some point? I'm not sure, but anyway, it does seem like someone with more media literacy could maybe make an argument that the Wenger are the baddies here, taking a very European approach with the discovery of a new piece of land. The story does just kinda end though, just like with Far Cry 4. I think I may have done the story in the quote-unquote wrong order as well, as I killed the Udam chap first before the Azila lady. But once you've killed them both, that's pretty much it. I don't know what sort of ending I would have preferred, but I certainly don't think I should have been left standing there thinking, do I have to do more, or is that the end? Importantly though, the game still has that random chaos that I feel is the core of what makes a Far Cry game Far Cry. Since Far Cry 2, these games have had a series of systems that operate independently and will occasionally overlap with each other right in front of you. In Far Cry 2, it was things like gun jams and malaria attacks, and in Far Cry 4, it was roaming objectives and angry animals, providing each player with unique encounters that would be almost impossible to recreate. Primal still has these moments, but due to the lower number of systems at play, these feel more like funny little incidents rather than what some people call water cooler moments. At least, that's from my experience. Maybe if I wasn't such a pussy and actually played survivor mode like a real man, I'd have had more exciting encounters, right? So when it comes to ranking this game, I'm stuck with the same problem I had for pretty much every game except 4. Like the first 4 games in the series, this one is distinctly different from all of the others, and as such it makes it hard to put in some sort of preferential order. If you haven't skipped ahead to look at where I ranked it already, first of all, thank you for your patience, you really are an angel. Secondly, I do want to emphasize that I really enjoyed this game and I will go back to play it again at some point. However, because I'm not a coward who does tier ranking lists, I have to put this somewhere in this order, and to figure out where, I find myself needing to ask one question. If one day in the far dystopian future I found myself thinking, you know, I'd like to play a Far Cry game, just one though, and none of the others for at least a couple of years or so, where in my list of preferences would I place Far Cry Primal? And the answer to that would be here, below Blood Dragon. Yes, I know, boo hiss, fuck me, right, I'm just a casual, what do I know. Again, I really enjoyed this game, but because it has such a heavy focus on crafting, it makes it too different from that core Far Cry experience to really go any higher than this for my list. If I were ranking survival crafting games, then this would likely get a much higher spot, because the inclusion of an optional hardcore mode essentially makes this a great introduction into survival crafting genre, as well as providing sustenance for more experienced fans of those mechanics. But for me, taken as a Far Cry game, I've got to put this here. I would say don't shout at me in the comments, but actually I don't mind that because that's interaction and it drives discoverability, so go nuts. Make sure to break each sentence into a separate comment. The next video will be on, you guessed it, Far Cry 5, the first entry in the series that I bought on release but never managed to complete. Honestly, this was mostly because God of War came out a couple of weeks later and I lost all interest, but let's see if I can get to the end of it this time. I just realised that I also failed to mention the woolly mammoths in this game and didn't make a single mom joke. So, what's the difference between your mom and a woolly mammoth? One is large and hairy and I spent several hours riding, and the other is a woolly mammoth. Please don't unsubscribe.